part of this program that's probably my favorite, and that's getting to hear your testimonies. Bob calls it your story. So I'd like to start with you, Janie, and ask you about your story.
My story starts when I was 10 or 11, Lampasas, Texas, where my daddy was the preacher at the First Baptist Church. Obviously, I grew up in a Christian home with fabulous parents who loved us and didn't so much teach us by words, but we were at the church, we were at Sunday school, we were at Bible school, we were there. And one day when the invitation was given, I asked my mother if I could go to the front, and she said, "Oh, well, wait, we'll talk about it." And we didn't talk about it. Nothing else was ever brought up or said. And then sometime later, the invitation was given, and my little feet just flew out of that aisle down to the front. Out-of-body experience, that's not it, or magical, or I don't have a word for it, but I just went. And don't remember what I said to my daddy. Probably I want to be saved. And he said, "Baby, I've been praying for you." And so that's it for me. That's my story.
PK.
Oh,
all right.
yes.
I did not know that.
Yes.
All right. Al, how about your story?
I was like so many that are here that have been in this chair. When the church doors were open, my parents brought me to church. I was born breech. My mother said I'd been an only child if I'd have been the first child. But I was born on Wednesday, and my aunt took me to Sunday school that Sunday. And for the next 12 years, I didn't miss a Sunday school class. I went once with chicken pox to the older group because they'd all had the chicken pox, so I would get that. And as Jane says, we went to everything. I went to youth camp when I was 7, I think. We went and stayed in a tent. The camp was in Lakeview, and I went for years, every year, till I was a senior in high school. So I was around church all the time, but I'm a very shy individual, and I don't memorize well. And you've said that you knew all the church words. They were somewhere back in my brain, but I was always scared to go down at the front because I was afraid he was going to ask me some question and I couldn't answer it. Yeah. And I'd be a fool, and they'd send me back and put me in a dunce chair. But anyway, we went to a revival in Vance, Texas, which was about 50 miles north of where we lived, because we went to revivals no matter where. And there was a church of about 100, and there was probably 125 to 150 in the church. I was in the very back of the auditorium. Well, it was really the Sunday school class that they opened up. And we had windows open, and it was night. And the revival preacher was really getting after it. And during the invitation, anybody that has not been saved, raise your hand. I raised my hand. I thought I was so far back he wouldn't see it, but he did and made eye contact, or at least I thought he did. And back then we had the sinner's prayer. And he said, "Pray the sinner's prayer with me." And I did. And then he said, "Now come forward and make it a public." And I said, "No, I'm not doing that." I was too shy. And I also was smart enough to know if I came down that night, I'd have to go to my home church and do it all over again. So I rationalized and said, I'll just wait, do it public later. I was probably in the neighborhood of 10 or 11. It was in the summer. We had a fall revival in Uvalde at the Baptist Temple, and the same preacher was there. We weren't in the back this time, and I was on the aisle. I can still remember him looking at me. He made that same call. I didn't raise my hand that time. But he looked at me. I knew, but I didn't say anything. Fast forward to March. sitting on the second row, interim preacher preaching about Lord's Supper. Didn't really preach, he just said a few things. And there were 4 of us boys sitting there, and one of the young men said, "You and Charlie need to go forward, make a public display of affection." Affection. It is an affection. And Charlie said, "I'll go if you go." I said, "Shoot, that sounds like the deal." So I took that 5 steps down there, told him I wanted to make a public display of affection. Oh,
Profession.
profession. See, I told you I can't remember stuff. And he said, "Did you just now do that?" And I said, "No, I've done it before. I just want to make it public." He says, "Okay, all right." He sat me down. Charlie didn't go down there. But that's basically how it happened. He surprised him, and he surprised me, he surprised my parents. Much like Charlie, just like Jane, my parents never talked to me about it. When I was young, we had Bible study at the end. My grandparents, when I went to his for the summer, we had Bible study before we went to bed, read the Bible, and we prayed. My grandfather was a deacon, both of them were, both of them small town of Campwood. But it's been an up and down trip over these years. Her daddy was my preacher from 7th grade on. He left Uvalde in 70, and we were 55 or so when we were there. He wasn't too pleased with me being his son-in-law because I was not a model person. I have a lot of saints that brought me to where I am.
Amen.
Besides the fact that God has put me in places that have helped me to grow.
Amen.
Still growing.
Amen.
Still do dumb stuff.
Yeah.
But
We've never turned away and had huge rebellions.
no,
Yeah.
just
Just human.
Yeah.
dumb
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.